Most of you brands are treating Google Ads like a set and forget platform, and that's why your business isn't growing, especially when it comes to Google Shopping ads. You just dump your entire catalog into a Performance Max campaign and expect it to sort out the rest. It's important to note that just because Performance Max is automated doesn't mean that you can afford to be a passive advertiser. And in today's video, I'm breaking down the exact strategies that we use to dominate Google Shopping ads at Public Nectar. Now do stay tuned, because if there's things in here that you aren't doing, then there is a chance for you to save a lot of money and start growing a hell of a lot faster. So let's dive into the first biggest leak that we see on different Google ad accounts, and that is not having a third-party CSS provider. Every time I audit a brand's ad account and I see that they're not using a third-party CSS provider and they're spending 100k, 200k a month, a part of me dies inside. You may not realize it, but you're effectively handing over up to 20% of your monthly budget for nothing. So diving in, what is a CSS provider? Now, CSS stands for Comparison Shopping Service. So to give you some context, years ago, everyone just used the default Google service. But eventually, Europe ended up suing Google due to them absolutely monopolizing the market. And the result of this is that Google Ads now had to allow other companies to be able to place ads in the shopping carousel. So if you're one of those brands still using Google's own service, you're allowing Google Ads to take up to 20% of every pound that you bid as a handling fee. What that means is if on Google Shopping you're bidding £1, only 80p of that potentially is actually going towards the auction. And that's the beauty of switching to a third-party CSS provider, is that you no longer have to pay the fee, and instead they make their money off of a very small monthly subscription, which in comparison to how much Google are taking from you through their standard service is absolutely minimal. So if we pull up this graph here, it gives a really good visualization that we can see if you're with just the standard Google service and you bid £1, you can see the red box there, 20% of that is going straight into Google's pocket for no reason, and only 80p of that is going to the auction. Now, if you do have a CSS provider, then what you can do is bid 80p and 100% of that money is going towards the auction. Or instead of taking the direct savings, you can now start bidding £1 and actually know that that £1 is going towards the auction and start ranking higher than you were before using Google's default service. Now, the best CSS provider that I can recommend is one called Product Hero. They've been the best when it comes to customer service, as well as other features that you can use within their platform. Now, the way to check if you're using a CSS provider or a competitor is, what we can do is come over to a Google search here. I've searched for Nike trainers just as an example, and on the shopping carousel you can see at the bottom it will say by Google or by Product Hero or by Klarna, and if it says by Google, then they're using the standard Google service. If it says anything else, they're using a third-party provider. Now, as you can see here, even Nike Official are using Product Hero for their Google Shopping placements, which is the one that I highly recommend using. Now, when we look at a brand like Shein and they're still using the Google service, this will likely be due to the case that as a company is that big, Google often cut deals with big brands, and then they don't have to pay so much of a fee, so people stick with it. But in almost all cases, you will save so much money by going and using a third-party provider like Product Hero. Now, on the same vein, when it comes to Google Shopping, a big thing is knowing which products should be getting spend and which shouldn't. And the way that we like to run things at Public Nectar is with a structure called heroes, villains, and zombies. And also sidekicks. I'll explain why that's in brackets in just a moment. Now, the easiest way to segment your products like this is to use Product Hero Pro. Now, they do have an additional plan that you can upgrade to, which isn't a big cost in the grand scheme of things. I think it's still a sub £100 a month, which is pretty cheap for the value that you're getting off the back of it. You can set a target ROAS parameter, which helps it know what ROAS products need to be hitting and what dictates whether they're a hero, a villain, or a zombie, etc. So the way this works is we've got 4 buckets. The number one that we're going to be most familiar with is our hero products. Now, these are the ones, as you can see on the graph here, that have a high ROAS and high spending. So they're the ones driving the majority of the revenue on our ad account. And then next to that, we have sidekicks. These are ones that have a high ROAS, but they aren't spending very much. So they've got some potential, but Google's not really giving them the chance with spend yet. And then below that, we have the zombie products. Now, these are ones which Google hasn't really allocated any spend to, and they've simply not been given the chance. And we call them zombies because they're basically asleep and they're not doing anything in your ad account. And these will make up probably more than 90% of the products in your feed. And I'll go into how we can utilize those in just a moment. And then the worst of the worst is the villains. These are the ones that are often spending a big chunk of your total ad spend, but the ROAS on them is really, really poor, and they're not driving very much of the revenue at all in your ad account. Now, if you do end up using a third-party CSS like Product Hero, for example, for this particular purpose, what you'll eventually see when you first load it up for your ad account is probably this table at the top here. Now, the key thing to pay attention to is we have products on the left. This shows you that 96% of this particular account's products are zombies that aren't really receiving any spend. 0.7% are villains and 0.4% are heroes. So I think this particular client has a very broad variety of different SKUs, which is why it's such a big disparity here, but it usually is the case that at least 90% of these will be your zombies. But the interesting thing is when we go over and look at the cost. Now, the reason I've got this arrow here to highlight is that you can see the villain products are taking up 27.5% of the total spend, whereas your heroes are only getting 16%. So the villains are getting allocated more spend than your heroes are. But if we look over at the conversion value, the villains are only driving 5.8% of the total conversion value, as opposed to the heroes driving 51%. So heroes drive over half the revenue for this business, but yet only get 16% of the spend. And that is the issue that is causing you to lose so much money when it comes to Google Shopping, is the spend is just not going to the right places. Fixing something like this is exactly how we took a brand from doing 700k to over 3 million a month, predominantly through Google Ads, and that is by fixing where the ad spend is going. We need to make sure it's going to the products that are actually going to convert. Now, the idea behind this is that you would break these into their own individual campaigns, so that the villains you can set a higher target ROAS, and the heroes you can set a more aggressive target ROAS, so they start getting more of the ad account spend. And eventually, once you implement something like this, your ad account will start to look like this bottom table. And as you can see here, if we look at the cost, the heroes are now spending 33% of the total account budget, whereas the villains are only spending 13%, so it's flipped now. But as we can see in the conversion value, the heroes are still driving the most of the revenue, and the villains are now only still driving that same 5.8%. So we've saved ourselves a lot of money by reallocating budget into the heroes instead of the villains. So this bottom one is a much, much healthier position for an ad account to be in that's running Google Shopping. So this is a graph that Product Hero themselves actually provide, and it can show that before you might have a flat line between your hero spending and your villain spending, but as you start to pull the villain spending down and repurpose it into heroes, you just see a big spike up in your revenue. You can start to scale up very, very quickly once Google starts getting the data through the hero products. And to show you what that looks like in an ad account, I have an example here where we're running a feed only Performance Max campaign, but we're only running shopping ads. We're not running any search, display or anything like that. It is completely just for the shopping feed only. We have the Heroes campaign here, which has generated over £241,000 with a 925% ROAS target, whereas the villains, obviously we've set a higher target ROAS to throttle them back, and that's generated £45,000. Now, a big benefit as well to doing this is not only do the villains throttle their spend so you stop losing so much money, but you can often actually end up pivoting the villains into hero products. As you can see here, it's not as much revenue, it's around £45,000 in revenue, but the ROAS is still 9.9, which is so much better than what we were getting before, where they were so far off target. Now, the reason that I put sidekicks into brackets earlier is because they're not a priority that usually deserve their own campaign. Usually there's not too much spend going into them, and it doesn't really justify its own dedicated campaign. You don't want to start fragmenting Google Ads campaigns too much, or you're really going to start causing yourself problems. So in most instances, what we will do is set it so that the sidekicks also go into the Heroes campaign, given that they still have a decent ROAS, just not very much spend. So we like to consolidate these usually. Now, the only thing that's missing from this screenshot is the Zombies campaign. So this will be the campaign that has everything else in it. It's usually more of just a catch-all that we like to use for this. And what it will do is it will force Google to start spending into the products which haven't been given a chance yet. And what you'll find over time is that winning products, hero products, start to emerge from this campaign, and you can start pulling them out into the hero campaign where you start bidding more aggressively. So the fundamental goal is to start pulling money out of the villains, which are taking up all the spend, push it into your heroes, and also push some more budget into your zombies to try and find some potential new winners. At Public Nectar, we're using this across well over 90% of our ad accounts, and it is working really, really well. And now the third key lever that you can be doing to really dominate Google Shopping ads is something called feed duplication, and this also piggybacks off of the heroes, villains, zombies strategy. A big issue that you'll have is you may have a winning product, but your product title will only have a set few keywords in it, and it may be the case that there's lots of other potential search terms that product could be ranking for, but it's not because you've only got the limited number of search terms in there right now. But then you don't want to start doing like Amazon and cramming as many search terms into that product title as you want, as you may disrupt performance and it may end up ranking even worse than before. Okay, so how do we combat this? Now, what we do is we duplicate our hero winning products into a separate feed. As you can see here, we've got 82 SKUs showing up in this separate feed, and once we've duplicated them into this Google Sheet, we can start having more title variants for our winning products. So if I show you what this looks like as an example, what we'll do is we'll take a winning product. As you can see, this product 111778, we'll just add -PN or -PN1, -PN2. This is exactly the same product, but we're just adding a little extension to the ID so Google Merchant Center sees it as different. And then we'll change up the title. So for example, we have 5-piece black velvet lapel tuxedo for boys, slim fit. But then if we go down here, we then add in children's into the title. So now if someone's searching for children's, which this top title may have not served for, this one now will. So we're massively increasing our exposure and our likelihood to show at the top for a broader range of search terms. We know these are winning products, so we want to get them out there showing as much as possible. And in these other product examples, you can see that we've added black dinner suit or black formal tuxedo. We're just mixing up the language that we're using so we can cover a broader base of search terms. And as a direct result, you can see in this campaign here where we duplicated those heroes out, with only a small amount of spend, we were able to drive an additional £16,000 in incremental new revenue. This is revenue that we likely wouldn't have gotten anyway unless we had done this trick. And again, this is something that we're rolling out across all our ad accounts to really dominate and crush Google Shopping ads in 2026. So just to run through the 3 key levers that I've gone through in this video for dominating Google Shopping. 1, use a third-party CSS provider. If you are still like Shein, except you don't have a good deal with Google and you're using the standard Google service, you are costing yourself so much money or just not ranking as high as you could be for the same price. And number 2, implement product buckets. Start controlling where Google is pushing your ad spend. If you're letting it take free reign, as I've shown you, it will put most of your money into villains, which are costing you so much by not returning any revenue. And then number 3, duplicate your heroes, your winning products, once you've implemented the heroes, villains, zombie strategy, and start adding more search terms into the titles. Start increasing the exposure of your winning products so they can drive as much revenue as possible. After implementing this, we're seeing brands double, if not triple, their revenue in a matter of months. It is what is working right now and what you should be implementing on your brand. Now, a final note from me, if you're an e-commerce brand doing at least 100K a month and you want someone to dive in and show exactly where all the bottlenecks are in your Google Ads account and how much money you could be saving and how much more you could be scaling, we can help. I've put a link in the description where you can get a completely free audit of all your paid ads, including Google, and you will find out what you need to change to turn 2026 into your biggest year yet. If you did get any value from this, please like the video and subscribe. There'll be a lot more content just like this coming out each week. And with that, I will see you in the next one.